8 early signs that a relationship won't last. Hey, I'm Antia Boyd, Magnetize Your Man expert, married to my incredible husband Brody for over 8 years. So let's go ahead and dive right into the 8 early signs that your relationship won't last. Number 8 is the passive-aggressive trap. What can happen is when you grew up in a household where passive aggression was modeled to you. So maybe you've seen your mom just kind of rolling her eyes. Maybe your dad asked her, like, is everything okay? And she would say, I'm fine. But you clearly knew that your mom wasn't fine. Oh, did dad hit a chord for you? Maybe that's what you do in your relationship. Like you are actually the one who's like slamming the door and just saying, everything is good. I don't need to talk. I don't need anything. But fine actually means feelings inside not expressed. So you got to ask yourself, what feelings are not expressed? However, if you see that this passive aggression, which by the way, research actually shows that outright aggression is less harmful than passive aggression. And here's why. There's actually a couple different reasons. For one, when you're outright aggressive, you're kind of almost familiar with that monster, right? You kind of like have the ability to harness it in some way, shape, or form. However, when you're passive aggressive, that means you're actually trying to put on a good face to the outside. That means the monster is inside of you uncontrolled. It can come out at any time. I'm sure you've heard that metaphor of the water ball, you're pushing him under the water. If you push the water ball under the water with your hand, and you of course use as much pressure as you can to keep it underwater, what happens eventually? Well, to forces of the water and dynamics, it pops up somewhere else. And the same is true with passive aggression. When you have something unexpressed inside of yourself, maybe you're angry, but you don't want to express it because maybe in your household you learned that it's not safe to express anger, that it's not adequate to express anger. It's not mature to express anger, right? We're just like very even-keeled people here. Or maybe you were laughed at, maybe you were threatened when you expressed anger. Or maybe it was sadness. And you could just like not express your sadness because it just simply didn't feel safe, because you would feel inferior or insecure, inadequate towards your parents or towards other partners. And then your solution was, well, let me just become passive aggressive. However, when you do that, your relationship could end really soon. So again, in order to avoid that, look actually, what are you suppressing? What is the judgment that you have of yourself that you've observed as a child by your parents, and now you unconsciously expect your partner to act the same way? Now, even worse if both partners are passive aggressive, because then we're almost starting to talk about stonewalling and Gottman's 4 horsemen. Number 7 is there's no friends alignment. Look, if you don't like their friends, that could be really bad news, because research actually shows that if you don't like their friends, there's a really high likelihood that it's not going to last, because show me your friends and I tell you who you are. So the friends are usually the 5 close people in his life are what equates to him, right? What makes him him. I mean, hopefully, if he's conscious about it, right? So if you don't like his friends, that means you don't like his social circle. That means you don't like this energy that he surrounds himself with. There's a really high chance that you're not going to be in alignment with his values. So you really have to see, why you don't like his friends, right? Are they more like abrasive and outright, and you're more like timid and you're like soft-spoken, right? And they're more like aggressive. Or is it the other way around? You are more the outspoken one, and they're just like, you know what? You don't need to be so loud, right? Or maybe they go to concerts, heavy metal, and you can't stand heavy metal. I don't know what it is, right? Maybe they drink too much, maybe they don't drink enough, whatever it is. But you just like you don't gel with their friends. And I mean, if you have 1 or 2 that you don't gel with, that's fine, because you're not going to gel with everyone. Let me tell you, girlfriend. However, if you find like that you really don't like any of his friends, there's a really high chance that the atmosphere that he is under, you don't like. And that means you don't like the atmosphere that he would put you under. And that is really bad news, because guess what? Your partner becomes your atmosphere. Your partner becomes your unconscious, especially once you move in together. Look, you don't have that much willpower to constantly be aware of like, what did he say? What should I be aware of? Oh, what's that belief? Is that serving me? Is that a high vibrational thing to say, right? You're just going to start absorbing it. It's kind of like how children absorb from their parents. So your partner becomes your environment, and your environment trumps willpower. So be very mindful of that. Number 6 is the low trust quotient. Do you constantly have this feeling that, I don't want to share that secret with him? Oh, I probably should not tell him about what happened in my childhood. And, you can also tell, he may have something on his heart. And he said, he's just going to wave it off. He's like, no, it's fine. We're good. It's all good. I'm just stressed. But you can tell that he's holding something back. Now that points to a low trust quotient. And what's going to start happening is that there's actually a couple of things. For one, you will not be able to build the intimacy, the emotional connection, the authenticity and transparency that a long-term, deep connected, long-term relationship needs. And you also will not be able to actually express yourself for all of who you are. And because of that, you will eventually hit a wall. Or you can call it a plateau. Now, when you hit that plateau, that's when people usually say, we grew apart, nothing wrong with him. I just kind of was bland, we just like, you know what I mean? We just like, we got to the end of the rope. But you should really ask yourself, what is the end of the rope? What is that? That means you're no longer growing. And why you're no longer growing? Because you don't trust each other. So you have to ask yourself, are the trust issues coming from your childhood? See, I'm an expert in that, right? I studied personality psychology at UC Berkeley. I constantly look at what personal development, what childhood development pattern you're in, that you got stuck in, what are you modeling, things like that, right? Or you could also see like attachment styles, like anxious attachment styles and avoidant attachment styles equally don't trust. Now, the reason why they don't trust is because, let's bring sleep training as an example. So when you sleep train your baby, and I may say something that a lot of people don't want to hear, but it's true because we've proven that with research and how the nervous system actually responds. It's like when you sleep train a baby, you abandon the baby. So people think like, oh, it's great. The baby learned to soothe herself or himself. And it's so wonderful. My baby sleeps through the night. However, research actually shows, and if you guys want that article, I'm happy to send you guys this article. So the research actually shows that the babies were actually not sleeping. They had just learned to not cry. And what they learned to do instead is to never trust their parents. Again, right? What they started to do is they could freeze their nervous system, right? They could just like shrink wrap their nervous system, so to say, if you think on a nervous system level, and never trust again. So it could be that you have trust issues because of your childhood. Not saying that you're sleep trained, but things like that are unconscious, that were promoted by child psychologists and so on. And to this day, being promoted like crazy. You just have to go on YouTube and watch it yourself, right? Total ignorance around that. Attachment informed sleep training, total ignorance around that. But anyways, I digress. It could also be anything else, right? So maybe your dad was cheating, maybe your mom was cheating, maybe there was constantly like the doors were closed, your parents were talking, you knew, like you and your brother, your sisters, like you knew something is going on, but they wouldn't talk about it. And so because of that, you also learned, hey, I should not share all of my things, right? I should like hold to myself because that's what I was taught to in my childhood as well. So those are some things for you to look at if that's something that's happening for you and there's a low trust quotient in your relationship. Number 5 is, look, it's too much couple identity. You could also call that too much codependence. Do you feel like you have to go like everywhere together? You link arms, you go shopping together, right? Even though maybe the guy hates, let's say, even shoe shopping, you know what I mean? You feel like, let's say, I don't know, you're entrepreneurs. You have to travel everywhere together. You have to speak together all the time. Like whatever it is, right? But you have to just do everything together. You have to go on the walk with the dog together. You have to go pick up your food from the dinner, together, right? Like your friends are merging. Everything is like together. However, that is really unhealthy because, again, there's danger that with codependence, you actually feel like you're sitting on each other and there's no longer outside novel influences that help the relationship to grow. There's not enough variety that comes into the relationship, right? Where we actually feel like, oh, we're actually facing uncertainty. Oh, we're actually stepping outside of our comfort zone. Oh, we're leaping actually off the edge here. And this is actually what's growing us deeper together. So what you want to do instead, you want to make sure you balance it with the individual identity. So what that actually means is that you want to make sure you have your own time, your own hobbies, your own friends, even if it's just a couple, like maybe go to the grocery store by yourself, like whatever it is, right? But just make sure that you still know how you feel individually. Because when you merged, boundaries will merge. You will never know who am I, who is he, or the other way around, right? Like you don't know because you just merge together, you dream together, you sleep together, you talk the same way, all the things, and you're like, oh, he or she is my soulmate, but then at some point it falls apart because too codependent. It gets too boring, or you guys get both angry because you both have the same shadow, meaning you have the same part inside of yourself that you judge, or you start to project onto each other what you don't like in yourself, and so on. Number 4 is criticism over acceptance. Look, it's extremely important for you to feel safe, to feel accepted for all of who you are. Now, this goes back to sharing all of who you are, trusting the other person. So if the other person is constantly receiving you with criticism and always says something, well, I would buy that pair in a size bigger, you know what I mean? Like just want to make sure you look good, right? Or like, I don't know if I like your hair color, or like, you don't need to always like be so bitchy with your coworkers. So that's this constant like criticism, like, oh, you bought brown eggs? I actually like white eggs. Or, you know what I mean? Oh, you bought the low skim milk? Like I actually wanted to have the fat milk. Or, there's something like that constantly triggers this childhood wound of like not being good enough, right? It's like no matter what I do, I'm being criticized for it versus being fully accepted. And what happens is when you're constantly being criticized, you're actually putting up walls. So for one, you're actually mad at yourself because you're allowing the other person to criticize you, and then you get mad at yourself, and then you project it onto the other person. You start to become resentful, and you start to maybe counter it with passive aggression, or you start to snap, right? And you're like, well, you're not always on time, like you're not always clean up the dishes. And then sort of it becomes this like back and forth game of two parts of him and you, right? Where you guys are actually like coming from defense mechanisms. You're no longer connecting to each other. And then because of that, the connection bond erodes, right? And it's so sad, right? Rather than actually accepting. And what happens is you want to actually learn to accept yourself first, because when you accept yourself first, chances are way smaller that you will attract a man into your life who doesn't accept you, or who won't accept you after he tests you. See, I had men in my life, in my dating journey, who were testing me. One man was saying to me, that was like, I don't know, we were dating for a couple of weeks. And he said, you're just kind of too affectionate, right? You're too kind of like, you're hugging too much. And you're like, I don't know, And I said, oh, well, I had already accepted that part inside of myself. So I could authentically say, I had done a lot of work around it, right? Worthiness and value work. And I said, that's who I am. And then because it came from alignment, and I was speaking it to him, and he was not coming from alignment, because the reason why he made this statement was because he didn't feel comfortable with intimacy. He was afraid of a deeper connection. So you need to throw a little wrench in the wheel, so to say, a wrench in the wheel. And so then he said, oh, no. So he actually started to respond with a shame shield, because he felt embarrassed that he said that, because I was totally advocating for my needs. This is who I am. I didn't say take it or leave it, because that's passive aggressive again, right? But just this is like as if somebody told me that I have blonde hair. Okay, thanks, I guess. I know that. And because of that, he responded with the shame shield of like, denial, right? He's like, oh, no, I'm just joking. You know what I mean? No, I love it. It's great. I love hugs. And he just like pursued me like crazy, right? So I tell you, you can turn this around when you do work on accepting yourself and healing your love blueprint. Number 3 is unequal investment. Do you constantly feel like you're the first one who picks up the phone, who makes plans for the weekend, who constantly comes up with creative ideas, but you feel like kind of, am I carrying all the weight by myself? Like, I don't really feel like that he's actually contributing in any way, shape, or form, that he's in some way, shape, or form proactive. Actually, one of the reasons why I hate the app Bumble, because Bumble pushes you right away from the get-go into the man into the passive, right? Because now you have established a dynamic, and my husband and I always say how a relationship starts, that's how it usually continues. Because we're actually saying that we're always agreeing what we are creating in the first place. It has something to do with being congruent with our identity. Now, when we out of the sense like, oh, now we're off the app, so now we're actually, that's just a side note. But if you constantly feel like, wait, I'm the one who thinks about what to give him for his birthday, and I'm thinking about, what kind of shirt. He had like one client, and she was like, oh, I was like wondering if I could buy him this Hawaiian shirt and all of these things, right? And he's like, wait, what? No. And I said, what are you doing? Because what's going to start happening is that he will start taking you for granted, and you will take potentially even on abusive partners as well, because they're like, oh, she just focuses on me. So then I can just focus on myself. So narcissists would fall into that category, for example. And then, or also like emotionally unavailable men, like a dismissive avoidant attachment style, who's definitely afraid of intimacy, would fall into that category, right? Where you constantly feel like, I have to carry the weight. Now, if that happens, again, it won't last, girlfriend, because you will grow resentful after a while, and you will actually break it off. Because here's the thing, and Tony Robbins talks about that. It's called the Crazy 8 concept. So on the one hand, we want to feel that connection to ourselves, right? That sense of, maybe also certainty and on significance. And how we do that is by actually going sort of like into the helpless victim pattern. Okay, so, we're going like, oh, why is this happening to me? And so sad, right? And then the friends are picking up the phone and listening to your story, and you feel so connected to yourself, and you are certain about it because it's happening all the time. You actually, as a matter of fact, you can totally predict it, right? So then at some point, you get sick and tired of feeling helpless and powerless. So you say, it's time for me to swing into the opposite, which is the power part. Right? I could call it the bitch in my framework. So when you go into the bitch, now all of a sudden you're abrasive, I don't care, whatever. And this is what starts to happen when you're in an unequal investment situation. You actually can also start to flip. I had clients who were actually explaining to me that out of the sudden, the man didn't have time and all the things. And then they were just like flipping on them and starting to insult them. And said like, you never have time for me. And that totally changed that tone of voice. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, because on the Crazy 8 concept, right, she wanted to feel powerful again, right? She wanted to feel significant again, right? She wanted to feel heard again. She wanted to trust herself again. And so that's what's going to start happening if you're in an unequal investment relationship. So again, how you change that is from the get-go. You make sure that it is equal, right? That you're not giving more than they do. I don't say tit for tat, but if you notice weeks go by and it's always you, learning to lean back, learning like, wow, where did I learn that if I don't make something happen? See, that was my story. I got prayers about this like 2 years ago, so 2.5 years ago, something like that. Because I had the story, hey, if I don't make things happen, and it was more business related, right? Then it's not going to happen, or friendship wise, right? Like if I don't approach people, if I don't bring the party, you know what I mean? But then once I got healing around it, I actually realized like, wait a minute. And I teach this my women too, right? It's actually, no, there's actually tons of people who would love to actually come to you, including men, would love to invest into you. But you have to feel safe to receive. Like you have to feel safe to receive. And that is something that you have to learn over time, because you have to warm up your nervous system, those receptors in your nervous system. All right, number 2, you feel controlled. Do you constantly feel like, no, babe, you can't go out in that short skirt, No, you know what? Like, I don't like when you cut your hair shorter than like shoulder length, and then, no, I don't really like when you wear those like big earrings. It's like a little like trashy. So you feel constantly like controlled, right? He's like, no, let's do dinner at the Chinese restaurant. It's like right around the corner. And do you also feel like sometimes that he is even jealousy on top of that? You know what I mean? So you feel controlled, you feel kind of restricted. That's never gonna work out, because like you will actually start rebelling. You didn't even know that you're a rebel until you meet someone who wants to control you. And then because he builds resistance, you fight against it. It's just total human nature, right? There's barely anyone who's like, yeah, please control me. I love it. I love to give up all my freedom and all my choices and my voice. And it's great. I love it. Make all the decisions for me, right? No. As a matter of fact, do you know why kids in childhood actually take on all the responsibility? When they always say, well, my mom was an alcoholic. My mom wasn't emotionally available. My mom had like 10 kids or whatever it is, right? Like, why did they take on coping mechanisms? Coping mechanisms being like, okay, it's actually my fault that this was happening. So they take on responsibility. You know what I do that? Because that they maintain a sense of agency and individuality. So this is inside of ourselves. So if you're somewhere in a relationship where you're controlled, you're out of there. You're out of there because control equals fear. Surrender equals trust. Number one, limited self-expression. And this I can actually like really relate to, because when I grew up, I would like sing and dance and skip through the house, and my mom would be like, oh, Antia, please. Oh my gosh, right? I would do the dishes and sing, you know what I mean? And the window of the kitchen would face the driveway and things like that, right? And so, yeah, so limited self-expression, right? So is he constantly like stifling, again, your voice, the way you dress, your friends, right? Maybe the job you chose, you know what I mean? Maybe the music you like, right? Instead, it's constantly like, no, you can't do this. No, you can't. No, shh. I mean, you can't mention that at dinner, right? It's like a little embarrassing. So, gotta keep that to ourselves, right? So, you know what I mean? Because that will come off as a little immature. But yeah, you're not that immature, right? And so, if you notice, like this constantly, that's like, no, you can't do this. No, you gotta dim your light. Like, you gotta, no, you can't do this. Like, that's also gonna eventually stifle the relationship, because when you have to limit your self-expression, essentially you're going to wither away, right? Because you can't blossom. You're not being really seen for all of who you are, right? You can't feel the joy and the creativity and the abundance and the embodiment. Like, because remember, you exist on a mental, on an emotional, on a physical, and also on an energetic level, right? So on a visceral level. And so if they start to become suppressed, then you come out of alignment. And when you come out of alignment, a lot of things will stop working, right? You may start not getting the raise at work. You may not feel other things being in place the way you actually need. And for those of you who stayed until the very end, the blame game. So I know how this can go. So when you can be angry sometimes, mostly at yourself or even afraid, and you're in a situation like that, and you're like placating instead. You're like, no, it's your fault. Like, why did you not make sure that we got the right house, or why did you not make sure that we got the right restaurant? Why didn't you make sure that the restaurant is open? Hello? Why didn't you make sure that the gas is filled up in the tank, because now it's empty and we're like pushing the car? Or, why didn't you make sure that you get your tires changed, because now there's a flat tire? And there's always like this blaming. There's always like giving up responsibility and ownership. So if that happens, right, especially if it goes then side, like both ways, that's also going to erode the relationship, because for one, it's really piercing at the other person all the time. And I have to say that's definitely something that I'm a little guilty of. And the reason why is because I've observed it from my mom. So she was modeling it, was always my dad's fault. She was always blaming my dad for everything and all the things, right? And that makes sense also with the passive-aggressive nature of a narcissist, of a covert narcissist. And Yeah, so that's like something you want to look at. Am I blaming, or I'm always blaming myself? Because that's the funny part too, is actually when my parents were blaming me, I was actually standing and listening and taking it all on, right? Telling myself, I'm taking it on, mom and dad, you can't do it. I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? I'm taking on the responsibility. I'm taking on the blame. So if that was you too, then you're more likely in a relationship to blame because you over accepted blame in childhood, right? Overly. I mean, you criticized and blamed yourself for things that there's no way that you could blame yourself for. And then, of course, you compensate for that in your relationship. Now, this could also be the true, of course, when it's the other way around. Like if your partner is blaming you or the guy that you're dating, right? And you're like, okay, like maybe he's willing to go into therapy, do some work around that, because that can definitely be shifted. And it's oftentimes actually a sign more of helplessness and fear than it is about of aggression. Now, if you still want to know how to heal your love blueprint and take my free love pattern quiz at getlovequiz.com, or simply click the link in my bio, link here in my description, comments below. And otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.